I reached the courthouse steps before the sun even bothered to rise. The world was still the color of ash, that soft, unfinished gray that sits between night and morning, like the sky hasn't made up its mind yet. The air was cold enough to hold its breath, cold enough to make me wonder if today would even happen, or if the whole town might just stay frozen a little longer, keeping us all suspended in the quiet before the truth. I remember thinking the sky looked staged, like someone had dimmed the lights for a scene I wasn't ready to play in. Inside, the courthouse hallway felt older than it looked, long, pale, humming with that low electric buzz that settles into your bones if you sit with it long enough. I took a seat on the wooden bench against the wall. Its varnish was worn smooth, the kind that tells you more people have waited here in silence than ever spoke in the room beyond. My hands stayed clasped between my knees. I kept them that way just to stop myself from fidgeting. There's something about waiting in a courthouse that makes a man feel smaller than he remembers being. Like the walls know your mistakes better than you do. Across from me, a vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a clerk laughed at something on her screen. Too bright for the hour. Too careless for the day I was walking into. I tried not to think about Elena, or how we used to arrive places together, brushing shoulders, whispering inside jokes only we cared about. I told myself this was just a formality, just another step in a process that started long before we admitted it. But then the doors opened, and quiet footsteps, two sets, light and hesitant, pulled me out of my thoughts like someone turning a page I didn't finish reading. Elena entered first. The soft click of her heels echoed down the hallway like she was trying not to be heard but couldn't avoid it anyway.
She didn't look at me.
Not once. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, on some invisible point only she could see. Her shoulders were drawn in, like she was holding herself together with whatever strength she had left. Mara walked behind her. My daughter, 13 going on 30, in the way she carried silence. She moved softly, like her shoes were stitched from clouds instead of rubber. There was something fragile about the way she held herself, chin tucked, eyes lowered, hair falling forward like a shield. And then I saw it, the tablet in her hand. She clutched it against her chest the way little kids hold stuffed animals when they've had a bad dream. Her fingers curled tight around the edges, knuckles pale. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words stayed caught behind my teeth. Elena glanced at Mara, not at me, and murmured something too quiet to catch. Mara only nodded, her eyes flicking toward me for half a heartbeat, then down again. The three of us stood there, suspended in a silence that felt older than the building. I told myself it was normal. Just the weight of the day settling in. Just nerves for all of us. But something about the way Mara held that tablet, the way she kept glancing at it like it might pulse with light, made the hair on my arms rise. When the bailiff walked past to unlock courtroom 3, Elena shifted her stance. Her hand brushed Mara's shoulder in a gesture that was meant to look gentle, but it felt off. Too quick. Too practiced. Mara barely reacted. She only tightened her grip on the tablet, her thumb pressing the corner like she was counting her heartbeat against it. I stood and stepped closer, slowly, the way you approach a bird you don't want to startle. Mara, I whispered. Just her name. Soft, like a question without the question mark. She lifted her eyes for the first time that morning. There was something in them I couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or certainty dressed up as fear. Something she was trying hard to hold steady. Elena stepped between us, not enough to be obvious, but just enough that I noticed. We should go inside, she said, her voice too flat to be neutral. But Mara looked at me again briefly, and then down at the tablet, as though it had whispered something only she could hear. I'd seen my daughter nervous before. Piano recitals, first days of school, scraped knees, and whispered confessions. But this was different. This was guarded, careful, like whatever she was holding wasn't just a device, but a truth she wasn't sure how to carry. And for the first time that morning, I felt something shift inside me, a small, sharp tug beneath the ribs, a pull toward a truth I didn't yet understand. The courtroom door swung open with a slow, tired groan. People filed in, lawyers, clerks, strangers with their own quiet battles. But the three of us stayed rooted to the hallway for a breath too long. Mara held the tablet tighter. Elena lowered her eyes. And I stood there, caught in a moment that felt like the stillness before a storm breaks. The sky outside the narrow windows was still gray, still heavy, still waiting. As we stepped inside, I kept my gaze on my daughter's hands, small, fragile, holding something I couldn't name. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was stored in that tablet, whatever truth she carried so quietly, was about to change everything. The courtroom lights buzzed above us, a soft, fluorescent hum that made everything look washed out and too clean, like a place where real life wasn't supposed to happen. I sat at the long wooden table, my palms flat against its polished surface, and watched a dust mote drift through the still air. It moved slowly, lazily, untouched by the tension in the room. Elena's perfume reached me before her voice did. Same scent she wore the night we first danced in her parents' backyard. But now it felt like a memory walking around without its warmth. The whole room felt staged, like everyone was reading lines from a script I didn't remember agreeing to. Courtroom 3 wasn't large. Just 4 rows of benches, a judge's desk that looked heavier than it needed to be, and walls painted a pale off-white that tried and failed to look comforting. The room smelled faintly of paper, old carpet, and the floral perfume drifting off Elena's hair. Every time I caught it, something in my chest tightened, like my ribs were trying to remember a life that didn't fit me anymore. I watched the lawyers move around with practiced choreography. Papers shuffled. Pens clicked. Folders snapped open. People who had done this 1,000 times before, who could probably handle these lives, our lives, without ever really knowing the mess beneath them. I kept my hands still. If I didn't, I knew they'd tremble. A clerk adjusted a stack of files near the judge's bench and nodded to us like we were next. Like ordering a coffee or renewing a license, a quiet kind of efficiency that felt wrong for something this fragile. I tried to breathe slow, tried to stay present. But the room felt too big and too small at the same time, squeezing in on the pieces of me I was still trying to hold together. Behind us, the benches creaked as a few people shifted quietly. One of them was my daughter. Mara sat with her shoulders folded forward, chin tucked down, her hands pressed between her knees as if to keep them from shaking. She didn't meet my eyes when I turned. She wasn't looking at Elena either, just the floor. The same spot on the carpet she'd picked the moment she sat down. When the judge entered, everyone stood with that soft rustle of fabric and stiff posture people save for ceremonies and endings. Elena's chair slid back quietly as she rose beside me, gracefully, deliberately, like she had practiced it. Then the voice, "Please be seated." We sat. Elena folded her hands neatly on the table, fingers interlocked, knuckles barely touching. Her face was calm, too calm. The kind of calm you sculpt, not the kind you feel. Her lawyer cleared his throat and began speaking, his voice rehearsed and smooth. Small phrases drifted toward me. Miscommunication, emotional distance, best interest of the child. Words meant to sound kind, sanitized, but they made something in me shrink. I waited to hear my name, waited to hear what shape they'd carve me into today. Elena spoke next. Her voice gentle, measured. Every sentence sounded like a line she'd gone over in the mirror, making sure nothing slipped out that she didn't want heard. She talked about our marriage like it was a slow-moving tide, washed out by time and circumstance. She spoke about separation with a kind of soft sadness that didn't match the sharpness I remembered from those nights when everything broke apart. Nothing she said was false, but the truth wasn't there either. Just something carefully curated. Behind us, Mara still hadn't lifted her head. Her hair fell like a curtain across her face, hiding everything except the small tremble in her fingers. When it was my turn, my voice felt foreign, like I had borrowed it from someone steadier. I answered the judge's questions the way I was told to, simple, direct, no extra color. But as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that my words were being dropped into a void, disappearing before they reached anyone's ears. Elena kept nodding softly every time her lawyer added something. Small, slow nods, like she was listening to instructions instead of memories. At one point, she glanced over at me, just a flick of her eyes. But there was nothing in them. No resentment, no affection, no recognition. That emptiness hit harder than any accusation could have. But what unsettled me more was Mara. When I glanced back again, her shoulders had curled even tighter. Her fingers were pressed into her palms. Her whole body braced like she was waiting for something heavy to drop. And she was the only one in the room who looked afraid. Not anxious, not awkward, afraid. Everyone else moved through the motions, legal rhythm, professional cadence, a story polished smooth. But Mara sat like she carried a different version of the truth. One no one else was brave enough to say out loud. Her gaze flicked up for 1 second. Just one. And in that second, her eyes met mine. Wide, dark, pleading. Then she looked back down. Almost ashamed she'd looked at all. A chill crept along my spine. Something wasn't right. Something was being held underneath all this calm. The judge called for a short pause. Chairs shifted. People murmured. The courtroom exhaled in that tired way rooms do when they know a long day is ahead. Elena checked a document, her finger tracing lines she already knew by heart. Her perfume drifted closer, soft but distant, like a song played from another room. I turned once more toward the bench behind us. Mara sat motionless, hands still clenched between her knees, eyes glued to the floor, as if staying still was the only way to keep something inside from spilling out. And I realized in a room full of practiced calm and polished explanations, she was the only one telling the truth with her body. The only one who couldn't hide what she felt. Why was she the only one who seemed afraid? And what, exactly, was she afraid of? The judge's voice floated through the courtroom like a slow drip of water, steady and impersonal. Each question he asked landed on the wooden table between us, flat and cold, like stones being placed in a row. I kept my eyes on my hands. They were folded neatly, too neatly, knuckles pressed against each other as if I could hold myself together with pressure alone. Across the aisle, Elena inhaled sharply, the faint tremor in her breath barely loud enough to hear, but strong enough to pull the air sideways. Behind us, a soft tapping began. A rhythm too fast, too anxious.
I didn't have to turn to know it was Mara.
My daughter, tapping the corner of her tablet, like she was trying to keep her own heartbeat steady. The courtroom felt different that morning. Not louder, not quieter, just tense. Like every sound was wrapped in cotton, muted but heavy. The judge sat high above us, glasses low on his nose, shuffling through papers with the slow, deliberate care of a man who had seen too many families reach this point. He didn't look at us as people, not exactly. More like cases, situations to sort through, lives to organize on paper. I answered his first few questions carefully, shaping each word like it might explode if I wasn't gentle with it. Where I lived, my work schedule, whether I understood the custody guidelines. I nodded, always with restraint, always with a quiet hope that I wouldn't give anyone a reason to twist my answers into something else. Elena sat stiffly beside her attorney, her hands clasped in her lap, fingers pale from pressing too tightly. Every now and then, her throat worked like she wanted to speak, but swallowed the words instead. And behind us, always behind us, Mara sat with her shoulders curved inward, the tablet resting across her knee like a fragile piece of glass. She didn't move much, didn't breathe much, just tapped.
Tap, tap, tap.
A rhythm that didn't match anything else in the room. A rhythm born of fear. Mr. Hale, the judge said, finally looking up, can you describe your current arrangement with your daughter? I lifted my eyes, but only partway. Only enough to show I was listening. I see her on weekends, I said softly. I pick her up Friday evenings. Bring her home Sunday night. The judge nodded, waiting, as though expecting more. I cleared my throat. We talk throughout the week. Homework. School things. My voice drifted, uncertain, because that wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. There were nights she called me whispering. Nights she cried without explaining why. Mornings when her messages were short, guarded, as if someone was in the room with her. But I didn't say any of that. Not out loud. Because some truths, when spoken, can't be taken back, and I wasn't sure if I was the one meant to reveal them. Elena lifted her hand suddenly, interrupting. Her voice cracked as she spoke, thin as paper. I'd like to clarify that Daniel, he's always been. Her lawyer touched her arm. A slight shake of his head. She fell silent again, jaw clenched, eyes avoiding mine. And behind us,
Tap, tap, tap.
faster now, the tablet bouncing lightly against Mara's jeans. That rhythm clawed at something in me, a memory I tried not to revisit. The judge continued his questions, but I barely heard them. All I could see was my daughter's hand, tapping faster with each exchange, as if her body was signaling something her mouth couldn't. I remembered the night she showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her hair tangled, her sleeves pulled down too far. Quiet, too quiet. She'd curled into herself on the couch, saying she just couldn't sleep at home. I made cocoa. She drank half, said nothing. The next morning, she left early, telling me not to tell her mother she'd come. Her eyes had that same tightness then. That same fear she pretended wasn't fear. The judge asked Elena a question, something about school schedules. She hesitated, just long enough to be noticeable. Her gaze flicked toward Mara, a quick, anxious glance. Mara froze. Her fingers stopped tapping for one breath. Just one. Then the tapping resumed, faster, erratic. The sound echoed in my chest like a warning, like a truth knocking from the inside. I looked at her, really looked, and something inside me tightened. Her eyes were fixed on the carpet, but they weren't seeing the floor. They were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere she didn't want to go alone. My throat tightened. Was this hearing really about two adults falling out of love? Or had we built an entire courtroom around the wrong problem? The judge set his pen down with a quiet tap that seemed to slice through the room. He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze steady, patient. But Mara, he didn't look at her, because she wasn't part of the paperwork. Not yet. Not until someone said something real. She kept tapping, the rhythm sharp, echoing off the wooden benches like a heartbeat slipping out of control. I looked at my daughter, her small shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly. And in that moment, I knew we were all circling around something we hadn't named. Something waiting beneath the surface, pressing upward. Something darker than divorce. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she carried was about to break. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, a thin, steady sound that reminded me of hospital rooms and sleepless nights. Cold, too bright, the kind of light that made every shadow look guilty. I was staring at the grain of the defense table, watching the lines run straight until they vanished under my palm. The judge was speaking, but for a moment all I heard was the scrape of Mara's chair behind me. Soft, hesitant, a sound that didn't belong in a courtroom. I didn't turn yet. Something in me was afraid to see the look on her face. The judge had paused the hearing to confirm visitation schedules, flipping through folders with the tired precision of a man who had done this too many times. Names, addresses, alternating weekends, lives split into neat boxes. Elena sat to my left, hands folded, rings turned inward. She kept her gaze fixed on the wooden barrier ahead of us, as if real eye contact might crack something open. Her perfume, something floral with a hint of citrus, hovered in the air. The same she used to wear on Sundays. Back when we still tried. I answered the judge's questions one by one. Measured. Even. The voice of a man who knew a single misplaced word could shift the ground beneath him. I could feel Elena listening. Not to support me. Not to challenge me. Just listening, as if all of this were happening far away, and she was only catching pieces of it through a thin door. Then the judge asked about holidays, rotating years, travel distance. The scrape of paper, the click of a pen. Ordinary sounds. But underneath them, something pulsed. Quiet, tense, waiting. Behind us, Mara sat with her shoulders tight around her like a too thin coat. The tablet in her lap flickered, with its sleep screen. She hadn't moved in minutes. And then she did. It was subtle at first, The kind of movement you'd miss if you weren't her parent. Her breath caught. Her fingers curled around the tablet's edge. Before anyone else reacted, I felt it.
The shift.
Like air pulling back from a storm. Mara stood. Not abruptly. She lifted herself the way you rise from a pew in church, careful not to disturb the quiet, even though the quiet had already been broken the moment she moved. The judge looked up over the rims of his glasses. "Yes, young lady?" She swallowed, her throat working harder than it should have. I have something to show," she said. Her voice was small, but steady in that way a child's voice should never have to be. "A video. It's important." Elena stiffened beside me. I felt the tension sharpen through her body before she even breathed in. Her nails pressed into her palms. She didn't speak, but the silence around her felt loud. The attorneys shifted in their seats, flipping through papers as if written arguments could explain whatever Mara was about to do. I turned to look at my daughter. Her face was pale, eyes wide but focused. The tablet shook just a little in her hands, like it weighed more than it should. A cold thread slid down my spine. A knowing without knowing. Fear that didn't have a name yet. The judge hesitated, leaning back, fingers steepled. There were rules, procedures, proper channels. But Mara stood there with the stillness of someone who had already carried something too long. The judge must have seen it too.
He sighed.
"All right," he said softly. "Bring it forward." Mara nodded once, so adult, so heartbreakingly composed, and walked toward the center of the courtroom. Every step of hers sounded louder than it should have. Soft sneakers on polished wood. I remembered those feet running down the hallway on Christmas morning, tiptoeing into our room after nightmares, hesitating at the top of the stairs on nights when Elena and I whispered a little too sharply. She shouldn't have known how to walk this way, like she was carrying evidence, like she had learned what truth costs. Elena's breathing changed. I didn't look at her, but I felt her stare burning into the space between us, accusing, pleading, warning. The judge signaled to a bailiff, who connected the tablet to a monitor. A dark screen filled the room. Paused at the first frame. Whatever it was, Mara had prepared it. She hadn't just stumbled onto something. She had chosen it. Chosen this moment. I felt my chest tighten, slow and heavy. What had we missed? What had she lived through while we were too busy dissolving a marriage to notice? Elena whispered under her breath, but only one word made it out.
No.
Not a refusal, more like a recognition. Mara took one small step back from the monitor, hands clasped in front of her. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Elena. Her eyes stayed on the judge, waiting. Ready. Too ready. The screen remained frozen, a single frame glowing pale blue across all our faces. The quiet pressed in so thick it felt like dust settling on old furniture. I felt something shift inside me, something slow, something aching. A realization not yet shaped into words. Whatever was in that video, it wasn't just about custody. It wasn't about visitation schedules or holidays or who lived where. It was a door we had all walked past. And now my daughter, my quiet, careful girl, was opening it for us. The judge reached for the play button, and the room held its breath. The monitor flickered to life with a soft hum, the way old televisions do when they're waking up from sleep. A pale rectangle of light filled the front of the courtroom, washing over the polished floor, catching the dust in the air. I could hear Mara's breathing behind me, thin, uneven, but her hands didn't falter as she held the tablet steady. For a moment, the image on the screen was only darkness. Soft gray, shifting grain. The kind of nothingness that feels like it's waiting to become something. My chest tightened.
I didn't know why. Not yet.
The courtroom, once full of shuffling papers and impatient sighs, had gone utterly still. It was the kind of silence people only keep when they know a truth is coming, even if they don't know whose truth it will be. The monitor's glow touched Elena's face first. She didn't blink. Her arms folded across her chest, elbows tucked close, as if she could shrink herself into the fabric of her blouse. She stared at the screen like it might reach out and name her. I sat a few inches away, but felt separated by miles. Mara stepped back, her fingers slipping from the tablet's edges. I glanced at her, just once, and saw her knuckles still pale, the way they get when she's trying too hard to be brave. The judge leaned forward in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He wasn't impatient anymore. He wasn't procedural. He looked detentive, fatherly almost, like he understood that whatever came next didn't belong in legal codes or custody charts. The footage brightened slightly, low-resolution shapes beginning to take form. A corner of a room, a shadow cutting across tile. Confusion pressed at the back of my mind. I didn't recognize the angle. I didn't recognize the place where the camera sat. And the question that rose in me landed heavy. Why had Mara, my quiet girl, needed to hide a camera? The first distinct image appeared. A kitchen counter.
Ours.
The graininess softened just enough to reveal familiar details. The chipped ceramic bowl, the old fridge magnet shaped like a lighthouse, the faint reflection of morning light across the tiles. But the camera wasn't at eye level. It was low, angled upward from a corner near the floor, half hidden behind the recycling bin. A place no one would ever look unless they were crawling. A place a child might know. My breath stilled. I felt myself leaning in without meaning to, palms flat against my knees. Elena shifted suddenly, uncrossing and recrossing her arms. She pressed her lips together, the muscles along her jaw working. "What is this?" she whispered. Not to me, not to anyone. To herself. The footage continued. A door opening. Footsteps entering the frame. Someone standing just at the edge, body half blocked by the counter. I squinted. The figure wasn't fully visible, just a sliver of clothing, an arm, the movement of someone reaching for something out of view. A sink turned on. Water running. Nothing dramatic. Nothing alarming. And yet, there was something about the rhythm of the movements. A tension in the shoulders. A heaviness to the silence. The judge glanced toward Mara, then toward us, as if waiting for the scene to reveal its purpose. My confusion grew sharper, needle-like. What moment had she captured? And why did it feel like watching the seconds before a storm breaks? The figure in the video stepped more fully into view. A woman. Hair tied up, posture taut. Elena's sweater. One I'd seen her wear 100 times. Elena inhaled sharply beside me. A sound barely audible, but enough. The judge noticed. So did I. On the screen, she placed a glass on the counter. Too hard. The sound ricocheted through the speakers, hollow, impatient. Then another figure entered.
Small.
Bare feet on cold tile.
Mara.
Younger by months, maybe weeks. Her hair was longer then, falling into her eyes. She tugged at her sleeve the way she did when she was anxious. My heart tightened, slow and painful. I didn't know this moment. I wasn't home for it. Or maybe I had been and hadn't noticed what mattered. The woman in the video, Elena, turned toward the child. Her face wasn't visible, but her voice was.
Low.
Sharp at the edges. Like she'd already been holding too much for too long. I didn't catch the words. Just the tone. Mara flinched. A small movement, almost instinctive. The kind she'd always brushed aside when I asked if she was okay. Elena in the courtroom closed her eyes. Only for a moment. But the moment said everything. The judge leaned forward again, elbows on his desk now, gaze fixed on the screen. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This wasn't about chores or spilled juice or a bad morning. This was something else. Something layered. Something we had both failed to see. The footage faded into soft static, the screen pulsing with gray. Mara stepped closer again, just one small step, as if reclaiming something she had lost when the video began. She didn't look at her mother.
She didn't look at me.
She looked at the judge. Quiet.
Steady.
Waiting for him to understand what she didn't want to say out loud. The static hummed softly, filling the courtroom with a sound that felt heavier than silence. I felt an ache grow inside my chest. Slow, deep, inevitable. A recognition forming like a bruise beneath the skin. Whatever came next, it would not fit neatly into custody charts or weekend schedules. The judge lifted the remote. The screen brightened again, and I braced myself for the truth waiting in the next frame. The screen brightened again, this time with a pale wash of bluish light, the kind a refrigerator casts when it opens in a dark house. It spread across the courtroom like a quiet confession, painting the walls, clinging to the edges of the desks. I felt my breath catch in my throat. There was something painfully familiar in that glow, something that belonged to the hours when the world sleeps and truth slips through the cracks. The footage shifted a kitchen counter, a shadow moving across tile, the hum of an old bulb. And just like that, I was staring at a night I barely remembered. A night my daughter had seen clearly enough to record. The recording began in near blackness, soft digital grain, the faint outline of a trash bin, the sheen of stainless steel catching half a reflection. It was our kitchen, unmistakably, but stripped of warmth. No morning sun, no sound of toast popping, no laughter echoing off cabinets. The only light came from the refrigerator door, cracked open just an inch. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat in the dark. On screen, Elena stood near the counter, her silhouette cut sharp against the glow. Her shoulders were pulled tight, arms close to her sides. When she spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper, but taut like a rope ready to snap. No softness, no uncertainty, not the waver she'd let everyone hear in the courtroom earlier. Just tension, coiled and constant. People shifted in their seats behind me. A rustle of fabric, a faint throat clearing, the kind of movement that comes when a quiet room senses something is off. My hands tightened around my knees. I didn't recognize this version of the night. I didn't recognize the tone in Elena's voice, either. But the camera, hidden low, steady, unblinking, had captured something my memory had let dissolve. Something Mara must have waited for. Something she believed mattered more than our practice stories. Then my recorded self entered the frame.
Slowly.
Almost dragging. I stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand braced on the frame like I needed it to stay upright. My shoulders sagged, shirt wrinkled, hair unkempt in a way exhaustion carves into a person. I didn't look angry. I didn't look charged with any kind of heat. I looked done. In the courtroom, watching it, I felt something cold settle deep inside my chest. Elena's voice sharpened on the screen. "You're doing it again," she hissed, though the words were muffled, barely caught by the small mic. Doing what? The question formed in the courtroom before anyone said a word. On screen, I lifted my palms, slow, peacekeeping, like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping child. "Len," the other me said quietly, "it's late." But she interrupted, stepping closer to the counter, her face still out of view. "Stop pretending you're the calm one." The sentence landed like a crack across tile. I blinked at the monitor. Careful, deliberate blinks. Trying to match the memory to the words. Trying to find anything that would explain why her voice trembled with fear in the courtroom, yet lashed with certainty in the video. In the footage, I took a single step back, palms still raised, body angled slightly away. Not advancing. Not even holding ground. Just retreating. Elena leaned forward in her seat now, eyes wide, fixed on the screen. She didn't defend herself.
She didn't speak.
She looked cornered by her own reflection. The video grew clearer as the fridge door drifted open another inch, flooding more light across the room. The angles sharpened, the shadows thinned, and details surfaced. My face, drawn and tired. Elena's posture, rigid and bristling. Her recorded voice rose again, not in volume, but intensity. "You twist everything," she said. "You always do." But my recorded self didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't even move except to lower his hands just slightly, as if they were too heavy to hold up anymore. A soft clatter sounded, the fridge door shifting, a bottle inside rattling lightly. It startled the me in the video. I stepped back again. Another inch. Another quiet surrender. And that moment hit me, harder than anything I'd braced for. Because this wasn't the story told in the judge's chambers. It wasn't the portrait painted by rehearsed lines or trembling words. This was something smaller, quieter, but truer. A night where I was tired, she was tense, and Mara. My eyes flicked toward my daughter. She sat still, very still, watching every second with the kind of focus a child shouldn't need to have. I suddenly understood the heaviness in the footage. The reason she hid the camera. It wasn't to prove damage. It wasn't to win a side. It was to show what fear looks like when no one is shouting, the kind that lives in silence, tension, and the small steps backward a person takes without realizing they're being seen. Why had she told everyone I was the volatile one? The question rose in my throat like smoke. But maybe the better question was why I hadn't noticed any of it. The footage dimmed for a moment, the refrigerator door closing softly, swallowing the glow, and leaving the figures in shadow again. In the darkness of the video, only voices remained, hers sharp, mine weary, the room caught between them like it couldn't breathe. When the screen faded to black, the courtroom didn't speak. No one moved, not even Elena. I could feel a shift, something dropping heavily into the space between all of us. Not guilt, not victory, something colder. Understanding, maybe. Or the loss that comes when truth reshapes a memory you thought you knew. Mara reached up and quietly pressed play again.
Her hand didn't shake this time.
The first thing I noticed in the video wasn't Elena's voice. It was the sound of the glass tapping the edge of the counter, a clean, fragile note breaking through the quiet kitchen. Then the silence afterward, the kind that hangs in the air when something is about to go wrong. I remember thinking, even before she screamed, I know this moment. I lived it, but not like this. The recording was washed in the pale glow of our refrigerator, the only light we used on nights when sleep wouldn't visit either of us. The floor looked colder in the footage than I remembered, a sheet of worn tile reflecting a restless household. I could see Elena's silhouette near the sink, her shoulders tense, her arms folded tight across her chest like she was holding herself together. In the courtroom, someone shifted in their chair. Papers rustled, but no one spoke. Everyone's eyes were locked on that screen, including mine. I watched myself enter the frame, moving slowly, like a man stepping into water he knows will chill him. My face looked drawn, my hair unkempt. There was no anger in the way I walked, only the exhaustion of someone who'd tried too many conversations, too many compromises. I remembered that night well enough. There had been long pauses, words we avoided because they hurt too much, and the quiet distance growing where love once sat. But seeing it from the outside, seeing how it looked without my own heartbeat rushing through it, that was different. More honest, more damning. Not of me, but of the story we had become. In the video, Elena brushed against the counter and the glass tipped. It didn't fall far, just rolled on its side before clattering onto the tile. Her head whipped toward me. I saw my past self raise both hands, palms open, an instinctive gesture I'd done 100 times. Not surrender, not fear, just trying to keep the fragile peace. But Elena's voice snapped across the room, sharp as a crack in winter ice. "You see what you do to me?" she said. Except on the recording, the words didn't sound wounded.
They sounded prepared, placed.
She threw her hand to her cheek. I watched her fingers hover there like she wasn't sure where to land them. And for half a second, a sliver of a moment, she checked the hallway beyond the camera's frame, almost like making sure someone was watching. Someone was. Because then, tiny and quiet, Mara appeared. Her little shadow fell against the wall first, long and soft. Then her face peeked around the corner, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. She didn't say anything. She just watched, just like I had so many nights. And then the scream came. A sound no one could ignore. A sound meant to be believed. A sound that tore right through me, even now in the courtroom. The kind of scream a child would remember for the rest of their life. I watched myself in the video take a step back, not forward. The footage was clear as day. I didn't touch her.
I didn't even move close enough to.
I just stood there, stunned, trying to understand what had shifted beneath us. In the courtroom, a murmur started somewhere in the back. Someone whispered, but he didn't. And then they went silent, maybe realizing the same thing I did. The scream had been a signal, a performance, a piece of a larger, more painful puzzle. On the screen, Elena stumbled away from me in the recording, one hand gripping the counter, the other still pressed to her cheek. But her eyes, the camera caught them, flicked once more toward the hallway, toward Mara, and toward the story she wanted her to believe. My throat tightened. It wasn't the accusation. It wasn't the lie. It was the realization that she was willing to build this narrative brick by brick, even if it meant Mara would grow up thinking her father was something to fear. A dangerous man. A threat. I watched myself in the video try to speak. My mouth moved, but whatever I said was drowned beneath the echo of Elena's rehearsed sob. The kind that didn't rise from pain, but from intention. Back then, I didn't understand what she was doing. But now, watching it unfold from the outside, it felt like hearing a truth I'd ignored for too long. In court, someone gasped quietly as Elena in the recording backed into the cabinets and whispered, "Not again, please, not again." Not again, though nothing had happened. Not again, though the space between us was wide and untouched. Not again, though the only violence in the room was the sound she created. A lie, but crafted with such care it almost fit the world she was shaping. And I realized maybe it had never been about me. Maybe it had been about winning something she thought she needed more, even if it meant losing everything else, including the truth, including Mara's trust, including herself. The video ended with Mara stepping backward into the dark hallway, her small figure trembling just slightly before she disappeared from view. Not crying, not calling out, just quietly retreating into a confusion she never should have been asked to carry. The courtroom lights felt suddenly too bright, like they were shining on all the wrong things. The doubts I had held, the moments I had swallowed, the guilt I had worn like a second skin. I sat there, frozen, listening to the last echo of Elena's manufactured sob fade from the speakers. And as the screen went black, a single question settled into the heavy silence around us, colder than any accusation. If this was just one moment she crafted, how many more had Mara seen? When the recording went black, the silence didn't just settle, it pressed. Like the air itself was trying to understand what it had just witnessed. No one moved. No one coughed. Even the judge sat impossibly still, hands folded like he was afraid any sound might break the moment before its truth could fully land. And in the middle of that heavy quiet, Mara stood small, shaking, as though she had been waiting years for everyone to finally stop talking long enough to hear her. I didn't look at Elena first. I couldn't. My eyes stayed on Mara, standing just a few feet from the monitor, her fingers curled at her sides, nails pressed into her palms the way she used to hold herself together during storms she didn't understand. The courtroom lights cast a soft halo around her, too bright, too cold, making her look even younger than she was. 15, but in that moment, she looked closer to the child who used to tiptoe into our room at night, asking if the thunder was real or just pretending to be loud. The judge shifted slightly, but he didn't speak. Neither did the attorneys. It was as if they all knew this next part wasn't theirs to interrupt. Behind Mara, I heard Elena draw a breath, sharp, thin. But the sound felt far away. Everything did, except the soft tremor in my daughter's shoulders. I felt something tighten and buckle inside me. Grief first, then relief, then something harder to name, the sadness that comes from realizing your child has been living in fear in the very place meant to protect her. Mara took one small step forward, and the world seemed to lean with her. Her voice cracked on the first word. She stopped, swallowing the tremor before it grew. I'd heard that sound before. The way she tried to be strong by becoming quiet. The way she folded her feelings into smaller and smaller shapes until they fit in her pockets. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I recorded it because no one ever believed me when I told the truth. A rustle moved through the room, the kind of reaction people give when they witness innocence colliding with reality. Not dramatic, just painful. I felt my breath catch. She'd tried to tell the truth, and she thought no one would believe her. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Elena, not angry, not defiant, just searching. Maybe for the mother she once trusted. Maybe for a sign that she didn't have to carry the weight alone. But Elena didn't meet her gaze. She stared straight ahead, her hands gripping the table so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her face, drained of color, looked like a mask trying not to crack. Mara continued. I didn't want to hurt anyone, she said. I didn't want things to get worse. She glanced at me then, quickly, like the glance of someone checking to see if the person they still love is still safe. I hid the video, she whispered, because I was scared. Her words floated in the stillness like fragile paper lanterns, soft, glowing, impossible to ignore.
Fear.
That was what she had been holding. Fear in her room, behind closed doors. Fear in the quiet spaces between arguments. Fear while listening to stories being shaped around her, ones she knew didn't match what she saw. And I hadn't noticed. Or maybe I had, but not enough. Not enough to understand what she was living in. My chest tightened, a slow, sinking ache that felt like failing her in every way a father can fear failing his child. The judge finally leaned forward, but just slightly, the soft weight of his attention marking the gravity of Mara's truth. Mara, he said gently, why come forward now? She looked down at her shoes. Her voice wavered. Because I heard Mom say that Dad scared her. A beat passed, and I couldn't let that be the story anymore. Elena's breath hitched. A small, thin sound, like a branch cracking under too much snow. I turned, finally meeting her eyes. What I saw wasn't anger. It wasn't even guilt. It was something closer to collapse. Her fingers trembled against the polished wood. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, to deny, to defend, to rewrite the moment we had all seen. But no words came. Mara's next admission drew the room tighter. I didn't know what to do, she said. If I showed it, I thought it would tear us apart. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it already felt torn. Like we weren't a family anymore, even when we pretended. The truth of that settled deep. Painful, but honest. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not dramatic, not forced. Just the natural release of something she'd been holding far too long. I wanted to go to her. Every instinct in me did. But the courtroom had rules, invisible lines we weren't allowed to cross. So, I just nodded.
Slow. Soft.
Letting her know, without touching her, that I heard her. Mara wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, the way she did when she didn't want anyone fussing over her. She wasn't trembling anymore. Just standing there, exhausted, brave, unwilling to let the truth be reshaped again. Elena lowered her head, her grip loosening on the table as if she no longer knew what she was holding onto. And me? I sat there with my heart cracked open in a way that felt both sharp and strangely freeing. Because the truth was out now. Not cleanly, not gently, but out. And as the judge called for a short recess, the room slowly began to breathe again. I watched Mara step back toward her seat, her footsteps quiet, uncertain. And one question lingered in the fading hush, settling over all three of us like dust. If this was the moment that broke us, had we already been broken long before we arrived here? The first sound after the silence was a breath that didn't know where to go. It came from Elena, thin, trembling, almost weightless, like she was afraid the room might shatter if she exhaled too loudly. She sat there with her shoulders pulled in, eyes unfocused, as if the walls around her had suddenly changed shape. For a moment, she didn't look like the woman who walked into court with perfect posture and practiced steadiness. She looked like someone who'd been caught in the middle of her own storm and finally realized she wasn't holding an umbrella after all. I watched her hands first. The way her fingers kept scraping the same patch of wood on the table, gentle, repetitive circles, like she was trying to wear a hole through it. Her wedding ring was still on. She didn't fiddle with it, didn't twist it the way she used to when she was anxious. She simply let it sit there, a small band of gold catching the courtroom light, pretending it still meant something. The judge stayed quiet. The attorneys stared down at their papers, pretending they weren't listening with every part of themselves. And Mara, she sat beside me, her shoulders curled inward, like she wished she could disappear into her own hoodie. I wanted to put an arm around her, but something in the room told me not to move. This moment wasn't mine to soften. Elena lifted her eyes. And for the first time in months, there was no calculation behind them. No rehearsed sorrow. Just a raw, frightened woman trying to gather her scattered pieces. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded nothing like it had earlier. No trembling theatrics. No fragile pauses. Just truth, stripped down to the bone. I didn't know what else to do, she said. Her words came slow, like she was pulling them from a place she'd avoided for too long. She looked at the judge first, then at me, but never at Mara, not yet. Her throat worked visibly as she swallowed. I felt invisible, she whispered. For so long. The sentence landed between us, like a small truth wrapped in years of silence. I didn't interrupt. Neither did anyone else. Elena pressed her fingertips to her forehead, eyes closing briefly. You stopped looking at me, she said. You stopped seeing me. And I didn't know how to ask for anything without sounding like I was begging. Her voice cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to make the room shift forward a little. I wasn't trying to hurt Mara, she added. I wasn't. I would never. She stopped. Her breath trembled again. A pause stretched out, long and fragile. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't drowning alone, she said. And that, I understood, even if I didn't want to admit it. The loneliness that creeps into a marriage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or break windows. It just settles in, soft, patient, until two people who once shared a bed begin living in different worlds while standing in the same kitchen. Elena finally turned toward Mara, her eyes glassy but steady. I never meant to take your trust, she whispered. I never meant to pull you into my mess. The judge shifted slightly, the faint scrape of his chair marking the only sound in the room.
Still, he didn't speak.
He let her unravel, thread by thread, with no interruptions. Elena took a shaky breath. I felt like everything was slipping, she said. My marriage, my home, my sense of who I was supposed to be. Her fingers tightened over the table edge. I wasn't trying to make Daniel look like a monster. I wasn't. I needed someone to see me. Her voice dimmed, almost like she was confessing to herself more than to us. I thought if I could control the narrative, maybe I wouldn't feel so empty. Maybe I could hold on to something. The words cut deeper than any accusation had. Because that was the thing about the end of a marriage. It doesn't always end in shouting. Sometimes it ends with exhaustion. Two people disappearing one small inch at a time until all that's left is the echo of what they used to be. I looked at her then. Really looked. At the woman I once loved. At the mother of my child. At the person who had become a stranger even while living in the same house. There was no villain in her face. Just someone who'd lied to survive her own loneliness. Someone who'd reached for the wrong tools to fill an emptiness she never learned how to name. Mara's small inhale pulled my attention. Her eyes were shining, confused, hurt, the way a child looks when they realize adults are far more fragile than they pretend to be. And that's when the truth settled in, heavy and quiet. Our marriage hadn't crumbled in a day. It had been dying softly for years. And its wounds had been echoing in her life long before any of us noticed. Elena lowered her head. Her shoulders sagged, finally releasing tension she'd been carrying for so long that her body didn't know what to do without it. I never wanted this, she murmured. Barely audible. Barely there. The judge let the silence sit, long enough for the weight of everything to settle where it needed to land. I glanced at Mara. She didn't look away this time. Her gaze held mine with something fragile, but steady. Maybe hope, maybe fear, maybe the quiet question of what comes next. Elena wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, a small, trembling gesture that reminded me of the nights she cried in the bathroom with the water running, thinking I couldn't hear. And as the moment thinned into stillness, one thought moved through me like a slow tide. A family doesn't collapse all at once. Sometimes it falls in silence, long before anyone hears the sound. And now that the silence had finally spoken, I wasn't sure which hurt more, the truth we discovered today, or all the truths we ignored on the way here. The hallways smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. I leaned against the wall, feeling the cool stone under my palm, and for a moment, The world seemed suspended, caught between the echoes of what had just happened and the uncertainty of what comes next. Mara's hand slid into mine, small and tentative, and I felt her lean against me. The courthouse windows rattled with the winter wind, and beyond the glass, the lake shivered, dark and restless. I realized that in that moment, for the first time in months, the weight I'd been carrying wasn't mine alone. Inside the courtroom, Elena sat hunched over the table, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent light. Her hands rested on the wood, still, as though touching it could anchor her to a reality she no longer recognized. The monitor was blank, a cold rectangle of nothingness, yet it seemed heavier than any evidence we'd just seen. I could hear the faint rustle of papers from the attorneys and the soft creak of a chair shifting, tiny noises, insignificant in normal moments, but loud here, in the quiet aftermath of revelation. I let my eyes drift to Mara. She was behind me, hesitant, but she found my shoulder. That gesture, simple, unspoken, carried months of tension, fear, and longing. Her small warmth pressed against my side, and for a fleeting moment, I could almost feel the family we had once been. The hallway outside the courtroom was quieter, though not silent. Footsteps echoed from distant chambers. The cold pressed against the windows, making the glass fog slightly with each breath of winter air. I let myself inhale slowly, trying to hold onto the small relief that flickered in Mara's presence, even while the hollowness in my chest reminded me of all that had been lost. Mara's head rested lightly on my shoulder. I felt her small fingers press into the fabric of my coat. Her eyes, wide and hesitant, glanced up at me. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. I wanted to say something that would fix months of fear, months of silence, but words felt useless here. So I squeezed her hand, letting my silence do the speaking. Through the courthouse windows, the lake caught the gray winter light, its surface broken by the wind. The ripples moved like time itself, uneven, unpredictable. I thought of all the nights Mara had slept in the shadows of arguments, of her quiet footsteps tiptoeing past doors she feared would burst open. And now she leaned against me without hesitation, as though the world outside these walls might finally be safe, if only for a moment. I could feel the tension in my body, coiled for months, begin to loosen slightly. Yet the relief was tempered by emptiness. The truth had been revealed, yes, but the cost was evident in the lingering silence of the courtroom, the blank monitor, and the space where Elena had once sat beside us, sharing the weight of this life. I took a step forward, careful. Mara shifted with me. Together, we moved slowly, letting the floor creak under our weight, a quiet acknowledgement of the fragility of the present. I glanced back through the courtroom doorway. Elena hadn't moved, her body hunched, her eyes fixed on the blank screen, as if the truth had left a permanent mark that she could neither erase nor comprehend. I wondered if she even saw us, Mara and I stepping into the hallway, breathing in the cold winter air, letting the warmth between us remind me what it meant to be present. The judge's voice from behind the door called for a recess, soft, deliberate. But in that moment, the words felt like a formality. The weight of what had been uncovered didn't need his permission to linger. Mara looked up at me again. "Dad, do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice fragile. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing that closure is never immediate. Some truths are heavy enough to echo long after the moment passes. The winter wind swept across the lake outside, rattling the window panes, bringing with it a shiver of reality. Life moves on, but not without scars. I realized then that what we faced wasn't just the aftermath of a revelation. It was the beginning of rebuilding. And that rebuilding would be quiet, slow, and uncertain. I stepped fully into the hallway, letting Mara cling to my side. Her warmth was steady, grounding, a fragile tether to something real. Outside, the lake continued its restless dance under the gray sky, the wind carrying a sound both empty and full. I could feel my heartbeat slow, a quiet rhythm echoing the fragile hope that even in the ruins, something new could grow. Elena remained inside, her silhouette rigid against the courtroom light. I didn't know if she would ever move beyond that frozen moment. But Mara had taken the first step into the space between truth and survival. And as we stood there, looking out at the cold, shivering lake, I understood one thing. Even when the truth leaves a permanent stain, the future, quiet, uncertain, fragile, waits for those brave enough to step into it. The wind gusted again, carrying the chill through the courthouse hallways, and for the first time in months, I felt the possibility that we might one day be whole. Not the same, not unbroken, but moving forward. The courthouse felt smaller somehow when we returned. The fluorescent lights seemed softer, the echo of footsteps less sharp. I sat in the same chair, but the weight of the room had shifted, from accusation to something quieter, heavier and more honest. Mara was beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the courthouse windows like it was trying to sweep away the remnants of what had been. And in that small, still moment, I realized the world had not ended. It had just changed. The judge's voice was steady, measured, carrying a calm that seemed almost out of place after the storm of revelations. He went over the custody arrangements with deliberate care, like he was setting fragile pieces of glass on a table without breaking them. I answered his questions, my voice quiet, precise, careful not to claim more than what I could hold. Elena sat across from me, shoulders slumped, hands clasped tightly, as though gripping herself together could somehow undo the past. Mara sat between us, small and upright, her eyes flicking from one parent to the other, absorbing the silence and the subtle shift in the air. The courtroom felt hollowed out, the weight of confrontation replaced by the thin, tense thread of possibility. There were no shouts, no interruptions, just the muted sound of pens on paper, the soft scrape of shoes across tile. Even the attorneys seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next move, yet unwilling to disrupt the fragile quiet. I could feel Mara's presence beside me, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her shoulder pressing gently against mine. It was a small comfort, a signal that the fear she had carried alone for months was beginning to loosen. And yet, I felt no victory, only a raw, aching hope that we might find a gentler path forward. When the judge finished speaking, the decision was clear. Primary guardianship would rest with me. Elena was ordered to attend counseling and to focus on rebuilding her connection with Mara in a safe, structured way. Her eyes flickered briefly toward me, unreadable. I didn't look back. I couldn't, not yet. Mara shifted in her seat, placing her hands in her lap. Her fingers twined together, a small, self-soothing motion I recognized instantly. She exhaled quietly, like someone releasing a breath they didn't even know they were holding. For the first time in months, I felt her weight lift slightly, as though the burden of the family's fractured truths had been temporarily set down. The judge's gavel echoed softly, marking an ending, but it didn't feel like the usual finality of court. Instead, it felt like a gentle punctuation, a chance to breathe after too long spent under accusation and doubt. Elena's face remained tense, but the rigid set of her shoulders softened marginally. Mara's gaze, once flitting nervously between us, now lingered with a quiet steadiness, cautious, but present. I noticed the small details, the way her backpack strap rested across her shoulder, the slight curl of her hair catching the light, the way she flexed her fingers in rhythm with her quiet exhale. Each motion spoke of relief, and yet of continued uncertainty. The truth had been laid bare, and now we were left to navigate the fragments with care. As we rose to leave, Mara slipped her hand into mine. It was tentative at first, then firmer, as if she had decided that she could trust me to hold onto her without breaking. Elena followed slowly behind, her gaze fixed on the floor, moving with the hesitance of someone learning how to navigate a world that had suddenly changed. Outside, the cold struck us immediately, sharp against our cheeks. The winter wind whipped around the courthouse steps, scattering fallen leaves and carrying the scent of snow that hadn't yet landed. But it felt different than before, not threatening, not harsh. It felt alive, like the air itself was promising something new, something lighter. Mara tightened her grip on my hand, and I felt the quiet strength in her small frame. It was a silent reminder that, despite the scars, she was still here, still present, still willing to step forward with me. I glanced at Elena briefly. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but she wasn't arguing. She wasn't resisting. She was just letting it be. The thought came unbidden. Can healing begin only when every broken piece is finally visible? When the lies, fears, and silences have been placed on the table, acknowledged, and set aside?
Perhaps it can.
Perhaps this is the fragile beginning of something gentler. We walked down the courthouse steps together, Mara in the middle, flanked by both of us. Her small figure felt lighter than it had for months. The wind tugged at our coats, tossed our hair, and carried away the residue of tension like water pulling pebbles along a stream bed. I realized that this moment, mundane, cold, and unremarkable in the eyes of the world, might be monumental for us. We reached the bottom of the steps. Mara paused, taking a deep breath, letting the cold fill her lungs and the warmth of my hand anchor her. She looked up at me, eyes wide, searching, and I gave her a small, unspoken nod. No words were necessary. Elena lingered behind, silent, absorbed in her own thoughts. Her shoulders weren't as tense, but the weight of the past months still clung to her. I didn't know what path she would take, or if she could repair what had been broken. I only knew that Mara's hand in mine was steady, and that was enough for now. The wind rose again, stronger this time, rustling through the trees, scattering bits of frost across the steps. The lake beyond the courthouse glimmered, dark but moving, restless but alive. I realized that beginnings and endings can exist simultaneously, that hope can emerge even amidst ruins. And as we stepped fully into the cold, letting it brush our cheeks and stiffen our breath, I felt it, a possibility, that even after the shattered pieces of truth are laid bare, healing might still find a way to grow, slowly, quietly, like new light breaking through winter clouds.